QSO Today, episode 296, Charlie Morris, ZL2CTM. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you to check out their new IC705 all-band portable transceiver. More on this later. And by QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the ham radio builder. If you're in quarantine like I am, now's the time to build a QRP Labs kit. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth for Z1UG, your host. Me and my team here at QSO Today are working on a virtual ham radio convention coming up within the next 6 weeks. The date is still in the air as we are learning how to use all of the tools to give you a great ham radio convention experience. Based on the 30-plus applications for speakers, all of whom were previous guests on QSO Today, it already promises to be a great show. I need your help this week. Please click on the show notes banner for the QSO Today Ham Radio Expo to fill out my questionnaire. I need to hear from you to understand how to build out the educational tracks to make this a great show. Charlie Morris, ZL2CTM, builds QRP rigs the old-fashioned way, starting with paper and pencil and combining basic components to make each stage of a receiver or transceiver. Once the radio is made, he adds an Arduino microcontroller, touchscreen, and other advanced components to bring his masterpiece into the 21st century. Charlie is a prolific creator of YouTube videos to document and demonstrate his creations. ZL2CTM is my QSO Today. ZL2CTM, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Charlie?
Yes, for Z1UG. G'day, it's Charlie. How's it going?
It's going great, Charlie. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Oh, wow, gosh. If you go way back, I've always had a love for electronics from when I was a very, very young nipper. I remember my parents buying me light switches and motors and batteries, and I remember making those turn on and off, and we had a Meccano set and using that. Always loved radios, AM radios in those days, and I fondly remember at a local AMP show, an agriculture and produce show here in New Zealand, they brought out the very first FM stereo station. And that was an amazing time to see that little red light shine up on my radio. So I've sort of had a fascination for radios all through my younger years. Later on, I joined the Air Force. I served for 30 years in the New Zealand Air Force, where I was an avionics technician. And shortly after joining, one of my neighbours in the barracks was a ham radio operator, and he did a lot of hand gliding. And he was after what we'd call a guardian angel. So he wanted someone else that he could talk to when he was out flying. So if he was to get himself into strife or to land out, so to speak, he could call someone up. So that was sort of the impetus to me to get my license back in 1990. Did the full tickets, so straight away did the Morse code, and been going since then.
When you say the 4 tickets, what does that mean? Are there 4 license classes in New Zealand?
I think it's all changed now with the CW is now gone, but I elected to do the full Morse license at the time, so it gave me access to the HF regions as well as the VHF and above. And
is ZL2CTM the license call sign that you got at that time?
Yes, it is. So, but unabashed, it's a vanity call sign. So. There was actually another avionics technician, a young lady called Stephanie, and she also did her license with me. So we both have our initials. So I'm Charles Timothy Morris, so CTM was free. So I've had that since day one.
And do you remember a first rig?
Yes, yep. So shortly after I was licensed, I got an FT707, a Yaesu FT707, which was a great little rig, actually. Not too many bells and whistles, but I must admit that's what I like. So my first rig was an FT707 running on a car battery, and then shortly after that, I made a power supply for that. I got this transformer from a local ham radio junk sale. And my gosh, the transformer was bigger than a car battery. It's absolutely huge. So I'm not quite sure what it came out of, but my goodness, it made a very nice 30 amp power supply, that's for sure.
And do you think that when you start out in ham radio, that starting out with a simple rig is the way to go?
I think so. My current rig at the moment, well, as you know, I like to do homebrew, but I do have one commercial rig here in the shack which I use for testing, which is it's a Kenwood TS120V, so a very simple rig. Again, no bells and whistles. It's got lots of simple knobs on it, and for me, that's what I really like. Each their own, which is the fantastic thing about amateur radio is you can go. There is something that will interest you. There's always something for someone, and I particularly like the simple rigs. So I really enjoyed that 707, and a couple of years down track, then got the 757. Which was, similar again, sort of not too many thrills, and no, that's what I like. Just sort of simple radio, sort of down to earth.
What's your favorite operating mode?
When I first got licensed, I was my instructor for the CW was a guy called Andy, ZL2CTM, who always called himself the Cold Kiwi. He said, once you've got your ticket, what I suggest you do is open up your drawer, unplug your microphone, put it in the drawer and close it, and leave it for 6 months. Do not touch your microphone for 6 months and only send CW. And I did that. I must admit, I really do enjoy CW. I had a bit of a hiatus in sending with some Air Force duties and a few other bits and pieces, so I sort of got a little bit away from ham radio for a while. Since getting back into it, it's been more voice, but I've got this yearning to get back into CW. So I've been spending the last little while just getting my proficiency back up to speed, and I can see myself again sort of unplugging the microphone for a good portion of the time and just sending CW. So I think to answer your question, I probably enjoy CW more than I do voice.
Well, it seems to me that Andy's pretty wise, that he created a novice experience for you. Something where you could actually build a new skill.
Yes, absolutely. He was a good mentor, and I remember shortly after when we were setting up the shack, I was living in barracks at the time, so I was a little bit restricted in what I could do. But he helped me build a Wyndham antenna. So I remember taking along there an old AM radio, and we pulled that apart and got the ferrite rod from the antenna out of that, and we stripped that down, and I remember winding the baling out of some old electrical wiring cable, and we made up a Wyndham antenna, which went great guns for a long time. So he was good. He was very good.
Were you a QRP operator from the very beginning?
No, I wasn't actually. I didn't necessarily have the radio powered right up, but sort of going through my early contacts in my logbook, they're all around that sort of 50-odd watts. So not running full flat out, but certainly not QRP. QRP is more of a recent thing where I'm sort of enjoying just that sort of low power, making the simple radios and just to a certain extent, just seeing how far I can get on a few watts.
Well, surprisingly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I saw a video where you're actually operating a single sideband QRP from a homebrew rig. And I think you kind of blew away the guy that you were talking to in terms of S9 quality, beautiful audio.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll talk about that later on in terms of why I'm sort of putting up the videos that I do. But no, it's amazing how, with a little bit of care, how simple circuits can at the other end sound really good. You don't need to go overboard; just simple circuits will do it. But I've been quite surprised myself at some of the responses from the other end. It's great.
Now, have you always been a home brewer, home builder?
Yes. So again, if I go back to when I was really young, I was always into electronics. So I always enjoyed playing around. I have memories of, I was actually quite lucky because down the road from where we lived, there was a commercial dump where all sorts of equipment was basically dumped. So I had an endless stream of radios and televisions and all sorts of bits and pieces. And at the time, I didn't have any qualifications or any formal education in electronics, so it was sort of very much sort of just playing around. One thing I did get, I must admit, we did a trip to the United States as a family, and I got one of those 101 electric kits.
Sure, electronic laboratories, right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually still got it up in the cupboard, and that was good. That was probably my first real taste of looking at schematics and trying to understand what's going on. But when I got ticketed, because I'd been through the formal Air Force training to be an avionics technician, we got a good grounding in basics. Well, good circuit design and electronics and theory and the like. So I was quite keen and bought myself a couple of books at the time which were available, which were the QRP notebook from Doug DeMoore, and also the GQRP Club Circuit Handbook. And I remember, in fact, I've got them sitting right in front of me. They've still got bits of marks in there from 30 years ago. And I remember going through trying to make some of the very simple transmitters, a single-stage transmitter with a simple either a VFO or with a crystal oscillator. And I do remember getting very frustrated because at the time, I didn't have an oscilloscope, I didn't have any kind of test equipment, and I really was just flying blind. But I'd have to say that from an early time, I was playing around with homebrew, but certainly not to the extent I am now with the latest equipment and that.
I have to tell you, what I really enjoy is looking at your blog page and seeing how, for example, how you are biasing transistors, microphone amplifier, for example. So you have all of the equations for each of the parts in order to determine what resistor values you're going to use based on the transistor that you're using. And I'm going to suggest I'll put a link in the show notes page for people who want to have a basic understanding of how to bias transistors for various kinds of circuits. That your notebook is actually a great way to start.
When I was getting into sort of more seriously into building radios, which I really enjoy doing, I was looking at the Solder Smoke podcast from Bill Mehra, N2CQR, and Pete Giuliano, N6QW. And another good source was Peter Parker over in Australia, VK3YE. And I found a lot of their radios very inspirational, which sort of led me into my sort of more recent endeavors with doing the homebrew. But what I found, even with the likes of some of the good texts that are out there, experimental methods for RF design, there's solid state design for the radio amateur. What I was sort of yearning for, and I just really couldn't find, was the basic theory. Right, we're going to make this amplifier. We're going to make it Class A. Right, this is how we're going to do the biasing. And I wanted to be able to do what I did when I first joined the Air Force, when we were doing exactly what I do now back then. This is the current we're going to have coming through it, so therefore this is the biasing that's required, etc., etc. So, I looked around. I just couldn't find that level of sort of theory that I was after, which was really the reason why I embarked down what I've done in terms of putting up the videos. I find it a lot easier to talk than it is to type. So you'll find that the blog is a very simple blog, and it's more just a repository of the circuits and the calculations, as opposed to any kind of in-depth explanation of what the circuit is. I prefer to leave that to the videos. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to give back to the community, the ham radio community, which I've got so much out of, and trying to provide, I guess, as part of that sort of collective wisdom. Even though I'm very careful to say these are not tutorials, because I'm in no way, shape or form an expert in any of this. So always, if you watch the videos, I'm always very keen and say a lot, this is just a video log of what I'm doing. I don't want to come across as knowing, a know-it-all. I certainly don't want that at all. But anyway, what I wanted to do was to give back some of the basic theory to show others that you can do this. You don't have to necessarily just copy a circuit. You can actually start from scratch and actually do it yourself. So that's the whole aim behind the videos and the blog.
And now this message from ICOM America. Get outside and be active with ICOM's new IC705 HF to UHF portable transceiver and its optional multifunction backpack. This is ICOM's perfect solution for SOTA and parks on the air. The ICOM IC705 is your perfect QRP companion with its base station features and functionality at the tips of your fingers in a portable package covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds. This beautiful new rig has RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz, and includes a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen with a live band scope and waterfall display. The ICOM IC705 will be the replacement and amazing 21st century baseband rig for microwave DXers, rovers, and contesters, and the operating choice for those under the new S-HAIL geosynchronous satellite footprint. Unbelievable. The radio is 5 watts with its internal battery and 10 watts with an external 13.8 volt power supply. This full-featured radio operates on single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Included in this package is a micro USB connector, Bluetooth to support linking to your smartphone or Bluetooth headset, built-in Wi-Fi, integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger, micro SD card slot, and the HM243 speaker microphone, which is standard equipment. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 with plenty of room for antennas, cables, and other gear to get you on the air from the mountaintop or the local park. There is a link to this amazing new rig on the QSO Today podcast website for this episode, and when you order your new ICOM IC705 from your favorite ham radio dealer, be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. We've been dancing around the videos for a couple of minutes here. You are a prolific builder. You have a great YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that in the show notes page, where you must have, I don't know, I lost count of the videos that you have on your site. Over 100 maybe?
Yeah, it's a lot. I'd have to go and double check how many there are. Well, what I've decided to do when I build my radios, I do it in sections. So I typically start with the audio amplifier and then start working backwards. Sometimes I'll meet in the middle. Do the RF amplifier coming off the antenna.
The Pete Giuliano method.
Yeah, absolutely.
And right, that's what he starts with, yeah.
Absolutely, it's tried and proven because you can build the auto amplifier, you shove your finger on the input, and you start getting a big buzz out of the output, then,
you're successful, right?
99.9% of the time, it's working. So it's a great way of actually building upon it, and it keeps your interest up because you can actually see progress as you're going through. So what I've decided to do is, as I build each one, throw the SIGGEN on and the oscilloscope and do some basic tests. It just makes a nice, easy video. So I just tend to go part 1 and then part 2, and then there'll be as many parts as it takes to actually get to the end. And I find that quite useful. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to go into the depth that I sort of want to. I want to go into, well, this is what I'm going to do. Right, this is what my thinking was. Right, this is the approach I'm going to take from the biasing and actually doing it. So hopefully, and I get the impression from the comments, which is great, that it is actually sort of providing that insight into at least what I'm thinking. Not saying that what I'm doing is correct, but it's at least getting some insight into what I'm doing.
Well, I noticed that you appear to be building on a flat piece of wood. So your project starts on a board, and as you say, you're building stage by stage. Is that because it's obviously easier to troubleshoot, but do you ever take any of those projects and then put them into a box?
No, I don't. And again, this goes back to when I was young. My parents, I remember when I was sort of growing up, and in fact when I was a lot older, they said, "Oh, yeah, you're a right little mess when we used to take you away to people's houses to visit because you always pulled things apart." So I don't know how many things I honestly don't recall how many things I've broken, but no, even as I was growing up and I had radios, I would always take the covers off and just leave them exposed. And I've got all sorts of things around the shack here, it's always exposed. And where the enjoyment I get is being able to use it or look at it. I can glance down, be it a clock or whatever, and I can say, well, that resistor there is part of the biasing network, that inductor there is doing that. And, I just really enjoy seeing the whole circuit. So no, The only radios that go into a container are the ones that I take out tramping or hiking or bushwalking, whatever you want to call it. Those ones need to go into a box, but the actual base rigs themselves, no, they always stay on that board, so I can look at the circuits.
Now, have you standardized the size of the board so that you can make some kind of a shelf system to slide the boards in when you want to store them away?
I think, Eric, that would be a great idea, but no, I haven't. These are just offcuts of boards that I've got in the garage, and I was asked that question today, and no, look, I just look after my shelf. I've got another two sitting there. There's another one sitting up on the top of that shelf. There's one that I'm actually using at the moment. They do actually take up quite a bit of room, but as it turns out, I don't want to say they're keepers. I've got one which is an SDR one based on the Teensy, which I've left made up because I'm sort of slowly adding to that and playing around with the filters and that. But a lot of them, I sort of use them, and I'm a bit like a magpie, which is a kind of bird here. Sometimes when the next shiny thing comes along, I sort of drop that and pick up the next shiny thing. So what quite often happens is I just pull them apart, strip off all the components, and build another one. So there's a few here which, like I say, have been around for several months, but the vast majority get recycled.
Well, you inspired me to buy a bunch of cutting boards made out of that kind of plastic. They're all the same size. I'm going to start doing my projects on these cutting boards so that I'll come up with a storage system and send you a picture. How about that?
That would be a great idea, because I've got a small room here. It's a single room in the house, which I've converted into the shack, and I've got shelves all around the side. And I haven't been struck by one yet in an earthquake, but it's a snug fit. So if you could do that, it'd be great. Thanks.
Our wives have put us into the back room, so just about everything I have is shoved into this room that I'm in as well. Let me ask, what are the basic building block components now that you're using in your designs and the projects that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm pretty well settled on for the VFO, and the BFO is the SI5351. I tend to use the little breakout board. They're very inexpensive, especially through the likes of AliExpress, and even through Adafruit. I've bought some of hers as well. It's a simple little board. It uses I2C, so I control it using just another inexpensive microcontroller. The Arduino range is ubiquitous, and some great libraries there that have been made for it. So at the moment I sort of just settle on from the heart, so to speak. The VFO is a phase lock loop, the SI5351, with an Arduino driving that with a rotary encoder. And then the rest of the radio is pretty well whatever I want to try at that point in time. So the mixers themselves, I sort of either play around with either the TUF 3 or the SBL1. There's a couple of rigs there with the NE612s, or homebrew mixers. So all just in the filter, the filters either homebrew or filters scavenged out of old rigs that have seen better days. The audio amplifier, again, whatever is sort of I want to try, either say a push-pull amp, or if I want to keep things simple, a little NE 5532, which is a low noise op amp, followed by the NE Sega and the LM380, which is quite a good little audio amplifier. So it sort of just depends on what I'm playing around with. But we live in a great age where the likes of the Arduino, these little LCD displays, the phase lock loop boards, very inexpensive. And it really does make home brewing so much, I want to say, easier, but also less frustrating. VFOs, to make a good, stable VFO is not easy. But these are great. You can, because I also enjoy the software engineering. So when I'm doing the radios, a lot of my projects, it's sort of half software, half hardware. So it's nice to be able to do some of the software engineering at the same time. So I get the best of both worlds. I get to do the software engineering, for the VFO, and then I get to do the hardware engineering for the rest of the radio. So no, it works well for me.
I saw on one of your software-defined radio boards that you're also using a GPS. So I think it was you had a whisper transmitter, right?
Yes.
So you had a little GPS board that you were using as the frequency reference.
No, that was actually the timer. So that particular rig, I just wanted to, because I never tried whisper. And I sort of quite like the idea of, and it's just sitting here, just a little transmitter sitting on the side of the shack, just doing its thing. So that one there, the GPS board was providing the timing, so that after, for the first couple of minutes after the hour, it would start cycling through the various frequencies. That one there had a little Arduino, which was driving. In that particular case, it was a DDS. It was the AD9850 board that was then generating the 4 tones directly. Yeah, but again, those GPS boards, I think I'll give them like $2.50 or something. So really, really inexpensive.
And how well did your whisper transmitter perform?
It was pretty good actually. So extremely low power, so just a single transistor on the output stage. So I was never going to get around the world, but I was getting regularly picked up throughout Australia, certainly around New Zealand. So I unfortunately, I'm not blessed with a fantastic antenna system here because of the property. But it was nice, and with the LEDs just blinking away, it was just quite nice. I was never trying to get around the whole world, but a single stage, simple little low power transmitter getting into Australia, I thought was quite good.
If hams wanted to emulate what you're doing, do you have a particular series of videos on your YouTube channel that you might recommend where they start?
That's a good question. No, I haven't gone to that extent to sort of curate a start with this series and work up. I think if you were to start at the beginning from a chronological point of view, you'd probably see. I started quite early with direct conversion radios, which is a nice stepping off point. We're quite lucky here in New Zealand where our spectrum is not too full, so you can get away with that quite nicely. But that's a good starting point, double sideband, and then introducing the second mixer and a filter and converting it into single sideband, which sounds a lot worse than it really is. It's actually not too hard at all. So unfortunately, no, but that's a good thing. It's probably something I should actually look into. Maybe create an introduction video that sort of displays, hey, if you're new here and you want to get into this, maybe start here. So no, I'll certainly jot that down and have a look at it.
Do you have any plans to provide any written material that goes along with the videos?
Well, I've been asked a few times to write a book, actually. Just, I guess a little bit like what Doug Demore wrote with the QRP notebook and maybe the QRP Club. No, no. It's probably something I should do, but I've sort of just left it up to, here goes the video. If you want a hard copy of what I've just presented, it's all sitting on the blog. Again, I'm not a fantastic typist, and I just sort of can't see myself sitting down and writing 5,000 words on the various stages of the radio.
What is the most challenging project that you've done to date?
I think at the time, the single sideband. I think just getting your head around that and making sure that the VFO was putting the IF where it needs to be, and then the BFO was sitting on the correct side of what was coming out of the crystal filter. So at the time, that was quite a challenge. But very quickly you go, oh, actually, it's not that hard at all. So at the time that was a challenge. The software-defined radio, again, I didn't invent this, but I tried my hand at using the Teensy and the audio library that has been developed for that particular platform. So again, sort of getting your head around how that works in the digital domain, and certainly with digital filters, and that was interesting. But that's what I enjoy. I sort of set a bit of a challenge to do something, and then sort of spend some time sort of reading up, trying to understand how to actually do it, and then get into it. There's been many a time I've gone downstairs for dinner and sort of bashed my head against the wall, going, I cannot get this to work. I cannot get this to work. But just a bit of perseverance. A couple of days later, great, just nut it out. Normally it's software. The hardware's not so hard. It's normally the software which I do that with. But yeah, I think single sideband and sort of the SDR would probably be the main challenges at the time.
Hey, this is Eric for just another short break. One of my favorite ham radio podcasts is the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, hosted by George, KJ6VU, my guest in episode 232, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ. George and Jeremy take a bi-weekly deep dive into their favorite Ham Radio Workbench projects and the technologies that fascinate them. If you want to be a ham radio builder or just be inspired, click on the link in this week's show notes page. You've mentioned the Teensy a few times. What is the Teensy and how do you use it?
So the Teensy is another microcontroller development board. It uses an ARM Cortex microprocessor, if I recall. So it's a very powerful board. It's basically similar to an Arduino. So rather than so it's the same board. It's got the I/O for it. It's got the microcontroller, an onboard power supply, and the like. It's just a different controller, the microcontroller. The good thing is, with a simple little bit of add-on to the Arduino integrated development environment, the IDE, you can use all the same libraries. Well, I shouldn't say the same libraries, but you can use the same development environment to program the Teensy. So, for all intents and purposes, it's the same, from a development point of view. But it's Peter. No, gosh, I'd have to double check his name. Really good product. Very, very powerful. And the newest one that's come out is 4 times more powerful than the one they've got. A great audio library that comes with it. You can do some very, very clever things. And some people way smarter than me have made some very, very good and very nice software-defined radios using that particular platform.
Now, are your software-defined radios, are you buying modules, USB sticks from suppliers in China and stuff, or are you building your software-defined radios from scratch?
What I do, the Teensy-based SDR radio is from scratch, so a very simple front end. I'm not using direct sampling, which is the more recent and I won't say the better way of doing it, but with the high-end SDR radios, it's direct sampling of the RF. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm dropping the RF down to audio through 2 direct conversion receivers being fed with a 90 degrees out of phase oscillator. And then that audio is then digitized using the Teensy's audio shield, which is an add-on to the development board. And then once it's digitized and it's in software, then it's a matter of applying some more phase shift using some Hilbert transform digital filters and then combining the signals in software and then feeding it back out through a digital to analog converter. So yeah, very much you're in control of the process and then trying to get your head around the likes of digital filters and the like. I do have, but I use it for test equipment, is the RTL-SDR. The simple digital television-based SDR dongles, which have come leaps and bounds. I use those for more bringing up a nice spectrum on the screen and using it as a poor man's spectrum analyzer, which I can then sniff the homebrew radios and then get an idea of what the various waveforms look like in the frequency domain to make sure that I'm not splattering all over the place and the like. So a nice simple piece of test equipment which for me works well.
What other test equipment do you have on your bench?
So I used to have for a long time an analog oscilloscope. I've now just recently I decided to go for a digital scope just to sort of upgrade a little bit. So I'm now running a Siglent SDS 1202XE, so it's a nice sort of 200 megahertz scope, digital scope, which is good. I've also got a Siglent signal generator, which goes with it. That works actually really well too, because it's got two outputs which you can set. They're totally independent, so you can have different frequencies, different modulation, different sweeps. What do you like for those 2 outputs? So they would be my 2 main pieces of test equipment. And then on top of that, just a simple LCR bridge for measuring capacitance and inductance, just a multimeter. So that's all I'm using at the moment. And like I say, and I said before, just sort of using the SDR receiver, that the dongle to bring up the frequency domain to be able to sort of see what the signal looks like in that domain. And then for me, that seems to work well.
Now, most of your projects or most of your radio projects are HF projects?
Yes, my love is very much sort of HF. I don't know where that comes from, actually. I used to live in India with my parents when I was 15 and 16, and I remember every morning turning on the shortwave radio and listening to the BBC News to get the news. And so I think I've always had a love for that sort of long-range communication. So when I did get my ticket, and naturally I went for the full Morse to get access to the HF band, and I've never gone anywhere else. And as I mentioned before, that's the great thing about ham radio. There is just so much from DC to light, and all various modes along that spectrum where there's something for everyone. And for me, it's HF, and it's the low end. I like the 80 meter band. I sort of just like the way it works, and the community around here. 40 and 20 I dabble with, 40 more so than 20, and that's only just to have a little bit more air time where if 80 meters is dead, then I've got access to 40 and 20. But the lower HF is where I tend to hang out.
Now, why has double sideband seem to be so popular in New Zealand?
Well, that's a good question. You've got Eric Sears, ZL2BMI, and he was another person who I followed way back when I was sort of initially starting to build radios. I'm not quite sure to answer that question, actually. I think we're quite blessed down here where if I look at the 80 meter band on the scope, it's not chocker. It's not absolutely full of people talking. So you can have a double sideband transmission, and no one's going to batter an eyelid saying, well, you're wasting space there. So I don't know why, but VK3YE Peter Parker, he's made quite a few DSB rigs, if I recall. The Beach 40 was an example of that. That was double sideband, if I recall. I know. I guess we're blessed with a bit of space down here.
That may be it. You're kind of tucked down into the remote corner of the Earth. Eric Sears, ZL2BMI, was my guest in episode 265, and of course, Peter was a guest a few years ago. The other people you've mentioned have also been guests on the QSO Today podcast, so if people dig into the website, they'll actually find those other interviews as well.
They've done some great work, all of them, some really good work, and very inspirational for me to look at that and to get into it. So, no, I send kudos to them, absolutely.
Now, you would think that being down in New Zealand, that operating power would make sense in order to be able to get your signal out around the rest of the world. But you're a QRP operator. Why is that?
I just like the low power. I guess it's because I'm not trying to work all 50 states or work the world in every continent. That's not where my interest is. My interest is building the radio, getting out, and then it's like, okay, I've achieved that. Right, let's build another one. So I've just never really had, the desire, I guess, to build high power. Having said that, I'm not solely wedded to QRP. So while most of my rigs are QRP, I do wish to sometimes go a little bit higher. We're not talking hundreds of watts. We're only talking, tens of watts. But so trying to nut out some of the push-pull amplifiers and that. But I just find QRP interesting because it's I don't want to say it's easy to work on. It's achievable. It's just a nice power. I like it. And the good thing too is I can take it out tramping. So my wife and I enjoy bushwalking or tramping, as we say here in New Zealand. And taking out a QRP rig, a homebrew QRP rig, is just so convenient. You don't have it weighs, it's nice and light. Again, I'm not trying to work the world when I'm out there. It's just the enjoyment of getting into the hut, stringing up a simple antenna, and getting on air. So no, QRP works well for me. I enjoy it.
Well, Eric Sears, ZL2BMI, had mentioned that he also is a trekker across New Zealand and that there's actually quite a number of large areas in New Zealand where you're kind of out of radio range unless you're taking an 80-meter radio. What do you take, and when you say you take a QRP radio with you when you're out trekking, what do you take out there with you?
I've got a series of rigs here, so invariably the simple little single sideband, 5 watts max radios. One of them was a CW rig just to do something different, but the vast majority here are all single sideband rigs here. In fact, you make an interesting point. When I was in the Air Force and we were doing a lot of training tramps around the Arthur's Pass region down in the South Island, we would take in the New Zealand Mountain Radio Service radios, which at the time were quite large and were running on 80 meters down about 3.3, if I recall, megs. And yes, I remember every night setting up a massive big 80-meter antenna and lugging that thing around. So there was, I think, doing that, and that was prior to me having my license, was probably another reason why that sort of enjoyment of HF and that long distance sort of work is sort of, I guess, why I enjoy it.
What's your trekking antenna?
At the moment, it's just it's a half wave long wire. So that gets strung up and goes into a little homebrew antenna tuner, and I decided to add to this one a little AD9850 based digital tuner, so I can throw a signal down it and I can zero the SWR before then plugging it into the main radio. But just a long wire, nice and simple. I was using for quite some time a half wave, which great antennas, but can sometimes, certainly down at 80 meters, that's a big antenna. And I found a couple of times that I just didn't have the real estate where we were trekking to actually set one up. And of course, now you've got to have a center point and then each of the elements. Whereas just a single wire is a lot more convenient.
Right. So you're using an end-fed wire with like a 9-to-1 transformer on the end?
Yep, exactly right. With a little L match there. It's got a little variable capacitor that comes out of an AM radio. If I recall, about 240 odd puff on that one. And the inductor I've got here, I've got several taps in there with just a simple little system to select which tap. So by doing that, I get a nice deep null where I need it, and no, it works really well actually.
And do you find that contacts on 80 are easy to get?
Yeah, I think so. You're certainly at night, and no problems at all. I've had those radios talking to Australia several times. Great. It does, when the conditions are open, you can go great guns.
And you're kind of running NVIS there, right? Where the antenna is kind of low to the ground, so the signal is kind of going straight up. Maybe perfect for covering New Zealand. Yeah,
exactly. I know a lot of operators that have those sort of squid poles, those big 6-meter high poles, which one of these days I should really invest in. But for me, no, it's very much just toss a piece of string over the nearest tree branch, crank up the antenna, and then bring it back. So you're dead right. It's invariably not quite as high as it needs to be. But again, I'm not trying to get around the world. I'm just sort of the enjoyment of setting it up, getting a bit of static coming through and making a contact. That's the enjoyment.
A very interesting website for amateur radio builders, and perhaps anybody who's an electronic builder, is the Hacker.io website. You have an association with Hacker.io. What is that association, and what do you do with them?
So Hacker.io is a place where you can meet up and talk and publish, I guess, what you're playing around with in terms of electronics. I don't necessarily publish there, but I was asked to host a hack chat, which I did just recently, and that was a really fun time actually. So here I was at my keyboard, not the best typist in the world, and then having I was told there was 98 people in that hack chat in the end. Sort of asking questions and people talking amongst themselves and backwards and forwards. It was a great hour-long sort of exchange of where I come from and what I think. A lot of the material we're actually covering here and sort of where I've come from and where I'm going and what I'm thinking and what I like, and that was great. It's a great community and some really interesting projects there that from all over the place. A lot of ham radio stuff as well, but Hackaday is a website that I check out every day.
It's one that I could check out every day, and it's quite interesting. It's a lot of time. Let me ask you, if you were to subscribe to amateur radio magazines or electronics magazines in this area, what would you subscribe to, or what do you subscribe to?
Right. Well, at the moment, I don't actually subscribe to any ham radio magazines, and that's not a slight. It's just I just don't do that. I have when I can get onto the internet to check the blogs, I sort of have a routine that I sort of run through, and that would be to look at Pete Giuliano's website, N6QW, just to see what he's up to, then nip across to Solder Smoke, just to see what Bill's been up to, then to Hackaday, and then to sort of general electronics and sort of technology is Engadget. So that'd be sort of the four main sites that I check out daily. And I think for me that's enough. There's just so much information out there. I can't provide a sort of a good recommendation of some of the magazines, but those sites work for me, and that's what I do.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. You mentioned the GQRP. Do you receive anything from them anymore? They seem like they're the basis of what you're doing.
Yes, well, that's the basis is their circuit handbook, which I've had for many, many years. That is probably one of the publications I probably will, in the very near future, sign up to, because I think what they get up to is what I enjoy. That sort of a lot of QRP work, obviously, and sort of just playing around with the new technology. So yeah, that'd be good actually, just to sort of get some ideas of what other people are playing with. A lot of the time I'm sort of in the shack and I'm sort of head down and I'm sort of soldering away. So I don't actually have a huge amount of time to spend sort of surfing around the internet. I'm sort of head down melting solder, as they say.
I think right now as we're talking, Israel is locked down with the coronavirus, the COVID-19. No one's going anywhere. No one's going to work except unless they absolutely have to. And it's my understanding this is also happening in New Zealand. Do you have any suggestions to amateur radio operators who are locked down what their first project might be if they're not yet into projects but they've got a junk box full of stuff?
Right. Well, there's a couple of things there, and I must remember I was watching the Twit network from the US, and I was watching the Ham Nation podcast, and they made a very good point. Ham radio has a lot of elderly hams. And it's a great idea to keep an eye on them, especially as societies, and New Zealand's no different. We're starting to get there now. We were starting to go into, don't go outside and just, keep away from other people. It's great to actually, it's a good idea, more to the point, for hams to keep a lookout for the elderly hams in their areas and create a skid, keep in touch with them. So that was the first point. But as we get more locked down, I think, yeah, depends what your sort of skill level is, where you start. If you've got a sort of a basic understanding of a transistor stage and biasing, then build a direct conversion receiver. I wouldn't bother going for a full transmitter, but the joy of receiving RF for me is fantastic. Having that speaker crackle into life and actually hearing something is really great. So build a simple direct conversion receiver. I think would be a good one. Very few parts to it. Nothing exotic. You could do a homebrew mixer, so you don't actually have to go and source, say, an SPL1 or something like that. So that'd be a good start. Otherwise, maybe dig out if you can, just get a simple kit and go that way. You do need to sort of. The good thing about a simple kit is you then get a bit of an idea if you enjoy soldering. Some people actually don't enjoy it, so that'd be a good start. Get into it. If you enjoy it, then you can sort of take the next step and start building circuits from scratch.
What came to mind in terms of maybe potentially advice, I see it here. Here in Israel, there's a lot of companies that are, like restaurants are closed, any social events are closed, and people are becoming very creative. We have friends that have a wedding hall, and of course, weddings right now in Israel are being done in supermarkets where you can have up to 100 people in a supermarket.
Oh, that's interesting.
The way to do a wedding is people are getting married in the aisles of a supermarket with all of their guests in various other aisles. Isn't that clever?
Very clever. That's clever, because they were talking about that to New Zealand today as the numbers have been reduced. So, yeah, it's very clever. Well done.
So a large supermarket can have, I think, up to 100 people, but they all have to maintain their 2-meter distance. But it's clever that you could actually get married in the checkout line at a supermarket. But one of the other things I've noticed is that the wedding halls that are used to doing lots of catering are using their kitchens and are actually doing catering and delivering. And this is a way to kind of keep those entrepreneurs in business. And I'm thinking that while we're all worldwide kind of locked down here, that supporting your kit manufacturers by ordering kits from them and giving you something to do and also giving you some project to have at the same time kind of keeps the whole supply chain going. Maybe that's an idea for people who are trying to figure out what the project is while they're stuck at home, and at the same time helping all of the people in the supply chain to actually keep that supply chain running.
Oh, I know. I agree. Yeah, if you can support your local industry, every country, your citizens, support that. Because there's going to be a lot of hurt for a long time. So no, I totally agree. In New Zealand, we don't have a huge selection when it comes to electronic suppliers, unlike, say, the States. But no, we do have them here, and no, I totally agree. Get out there and buy bits off them. That's a good idea. Perfect.
It's also a great time. I'm thinking about cleaning out my attic. I'm a hoarder of electronic devices. So if I don't have a part that I can't get from DigiKey at the moment, then perhaps I need to go up in the attic and start seeing what I can pull apart in order to build the next project. A lot of stuff up there, and I bet all of us hams have at least a pile of parts somewhere that we could start with a very basic project, as you say, like a direct conversion receiver. Let me ask, what kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life? Sounds to me like your wife doesn't mind you taking the 80-meter transceiver with you on a trek.
No, not at all. So, no, we're good. We've got our own hobbies, and I've got the man cave or the shack here, and no, it works out well. So when we go tramping, I'm not sitting on the radio all night, so it's very much the grey line. So get it set up, make a few contacts, pull it back down again, and then make dinner, and we're into bed pretty early normally if it's tramping. We've got another little mini holiday coming up, the two of us. So she knows that, and we both enjoy it. We'll find a nice, quiet Airbnb which has a bit of a large backyard, or is maybe sort of out in the countryside, and I can set up an antenna again. Spend half an hour having a quick chat with people, and then tear it down, and we're off to dinner somewhere. So it works out well. Everybody's happy, as they say.
What do you think the greatest challenge is facing amateur radio now?
I think that the challenge there is probably getting young blood through the door, so to speak. Having the young hams come in. I get the impression that they are there. It's just getting them in and getting them interested. And I'm sort of struggling with this one. When I grew up, there was the fascination of radios. There was no such thing as the internet. We didn't have cell phones, and radios were, I don't want to say magical, but they sort of had that lovely appeal of detecting some long distance signal. You don't have that anymore. The kids grow up with a cell phone in their hand, and they've grown up with the internet, that sort of instant communications all around the world. So I guess it's sort of trying to find something within the ham radio sphere which interests them. I personally haven't tried it yet, but I am seeing a lot of the young folk getting into some of a lot of the digital modes, the very computer savvy. So I think that's of interest to them. A lot of the new digital radios, the DMR and some of those other ones. I think that's probably good for them as well.
Charlie, it seems to me that the way that you build and with the components that you're building with, that seems like that might be right up the alley of young people right now, other than the discrete stages of the radios that you're building. But for the most part, you're using Arduino and you're using displays and rotary encoders and things like this that are available on Adafruit that seems to be attracting a younger crowd. Perhaps your video channel might be a way to inspire young people towards the hobby because of what it is you're doing, the magic of radio combined with the latest technology. What do you think about that?
Oh, I totally agree. And if you want to go, the next step and start looking at some of the SDR radios, yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of these kids, they'll go through school and they'll do. Look at my children; they did software engineering. So yeah, I think you did right, and it is inexpensive to get into, and being able to have that sort of good, stable signal if you're doing, say, the VFO, it's great because you're not getting so frustrated with an oscillator that doesn't oscillate correctly. Yeah, no, I think you did right. It's an easy way of getting into it, so to speak.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I think for me and my interests, it's just these inexpensive boards that are coming out that, be it a GPS board or be it a microcontroller or a display or a DDS, that's interesting. And I like to buy those because they are pretty cheap. And I have a saying here, it'll come in use one day. So, I've got a plastic box here full of things which, I must try that. And I've got an 809833, a little up to 12.5 megahertz little oscillator. Again, look to build a radio around that. So I think it's that sort of new, I don't say new technology, but that wave of inexpensive technology which allows people to homebrew equipment. I think it's great. It works for me. There's others which don't want to have any kind of sort of digital or an Arduino or software. They'd prefer to have just purely discrete. Nothing wrong with that at all. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's the beauty of hand radio. It's whatever whatever you enjoy, get into it. So I think that's of interest. The SDR, yes. I personally, for me, don't get any enjoyment in using commercial rigs. I don't want to say they're sterile. It's just I just don't get any enjoyment from doing that. The enjoyment for me is building it and then getting it on the air and then building another one. But if you're into that sort of high technology, my goodness, there's some amazing stuff coming out and some very small radios which are perfect for taking traveling or camping. That cover virtually every band there is and every mode there is on something the size of 2 or 3 packs of cards. It's amazing what you can get these days.
What you said kind of sprang a chord with me. Do you think that there's some kind of genetic code that's in all of us hams that says that we should have an attic full of equipment that someday will have a use?
Possibly. You can't go past a good junk sale, and we have an online website here for selling stuff, exchanging, called Trade Me, and I'm forever getting stuff off that. I've got a shelf next door, full of old junked radios that either don't work or are very, very old, and I've quite often just either pull them apart or I'll set them down and go, right, let's bypass what was a crystal-controlled radio, and we'll put a digital VFO into it, and we'll digitize it, which is another part that I enjoy, sort of, bringing old equipment up into sort of the modern age with a modern LCD and a rock solid digital VFO. So that's quite fun. And the other day I had off the same site a couple of amplifier boards out of an old radio. So I'm quite keen to sort of have a play around with those and maybe harvest the transistors of that and build another push-pull power amplifier. So I've sort of got these endless source of projects in the making, and it's just a matter of sort of, which way the wind's blowing on the day, right? Let's give that a go. So, So I think everybody enjoys a good junk sale, that's for sure.
I think you're right. What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Amateur radio just offers so much, from digital television to HF to VHF to microwave. I'm sure there's guys playing around with light-based communications. Whatever, find something which you really enjoy and just get into it, because it's all there. Find the community and just enjoy being in that sort of fraternity of like-minded people doing things that you enjoy. So that's what I'd say. And I'd say too that you don't, when you do get back into it, if you haven't, you've sold all your equipment and you don't have any more, you don't need to buy. If you are keen sort of just to get on and do a bit of rag chewing or a bit of CW, you don't need to buy the latest and greatest several $1,000 rig. There's just no need. My rig here, if I was to use the commercial one, the TS120V, simple. It's a simple little radio that'll do the trick nicely. Sure, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it'll get you back into it. Get your feet sort of back under the desk, and you go from there. So you don't need to spend a fortune. Just look around on the likes of eBay and get yourself a simple little rig. My antenna system here is a very simple antenna system. I have twin flex wire, which we call True Rip, which is a lot of people use it for speakers. That's my transmission line that runs outside, and just a very simple half-wave dipole. The elements themselves are quite heavy gauge. I can't quite call exactly what it is, but it comes from the local electrical supplier for people wiring up houses. So you do not need to spend a lot of money, and a little bit of solder and a little bit of hot glue and a little bit of sealant, and you can make your own antenna and you can get on the air nice and easily. That's the great thing about this hobby.
Charlie, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the QSO Today podcast. One of my favorite subjects is to talk about homebrew, what people are building. With that, I want to thank you so much for joining me and wish you 73.
My absolute pleasure, and 73s to you as well.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Charlie. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in ZL2CTM in the search box at the top of the page. And don't forget to click on the QSO Today Ham Radio Expo banner on the show notes page to get my questionnaire to help me make a great show for you. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support for these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages or by using QSO Today in the coupon box at the checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor, monthly or annually, by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 300. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use Amazon Echo and say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. Special thanks to Ben Bresky, who now edits the audio for this QSO Today podcast from the audio pieces that I give him. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.